The 2002 bombings in the Indonesian resort island of Bali killed more than 200 people, including foreigners and locals. Hundreds others were injured, many of them scarred for life. CNA correspondent examines the threat of terrorism in Indonesia and discovers that survivors are still trying to find closure from the deadly attack 20 years on.
A Balinese dance of peace opened the ceremony to commemorate 20 years of the terror attack on the island of Gods. Hundreds attended the ceremony at Ground Zero to remember those who died. Tributes poured throughout the day. For a few, it was too much to bear.
The Bali Bombing Memorial is in the heart of Kuta's main tourist area. The memorial stands near the former sites of the Paddy's Pub and Sorry Club, which were destroyed in the bombings. It's a grim reminder of the devastating attack that left hundreds dead and injured.
At the Australian Consulate General in Denpasar, a memorial service was held to mourn the loss of lives. 88 Australians died during the attack. It was the largest number of Australians killed in a terrorist strike. Australia and Indonesia have grown closer after the tragedy. Both countries are bounded by a common grief and by the conviction that terror should not be allowed to win. Canberra says it commits again to the ongoing work shared with Jakarta to counter the scourge of violent extremism. It also reaffirms the respect and cooperation between the people of both countries. However, for the survivors, finding closure remains difficult.
You never get closure. Closures would mean you forget, and I will never forget what happened. I remember what happened 20 years ago. I'm incredibly lucky to have been able to walk out of the Surrey Club where 202 people couldn't. It's a time to remember, but also to celebrate life and be happy and enjoy your life and wake up every day and be thankful that I survived.
On 12 October 2002, two bombs exploded at two nightclubs along Legian Street in Kuta. The first was an explosive carried by a suicide bomber, and the second was a much more powerful bomb in a van. The attack was carried out by a regional terrorist organization, Jemaah Islamiyah, with links to the Al-Qaeda militant group. JI members Amrozi, Imam Samudra and Muklas received death sentences by firing squad for their roles in the bombings. Another JI member, Umar Patek, who made the bombs, was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2012. Umar received a series of remissions for good behavior and would be released from prison. Indonesian authorities have since highlighted Umar as an example of the country's de-radicalization efforts. News about Umar's impending freedom shocked Tiolina Marpaung, a survivor of the Bali bombings. The 48-year-old who suffered a permanent eye injury said Umar should not be given remissions for his actions.
Saya nggak ada dendam sama orang itu, tetapi saya mau aturan itu jalanin aja sesuai apa yang keputusannya, seperti itu. Sesungguhnya kalau mau menjatuhkan yang seperti itu dengan perbuatan yang beliau lakukan, itu nggak setimpal dengan hal yang itu. Karena apa? Karena kalau dibandingkan 20 tahun dengan saya cacat seumur hidup saya sampai Tuhan panggil nanti saya tetap cacat.
Husnul Khotimah is another survivor of the Bali bombings. The blasts left Husnul with 70% burns and severed her left toe. Life has been hard for the 52-year-old who still has a young child. She could not cope with the medical expenses for her injuries and has given up hope 3 times.
Karena sudah titik jenuh juga, kalau berobat kan butuh biaya banyak. Pernah juga saya mencoba untuk mengakhiri hidup saya dengan minum Baygon. Kalau nggak ada lagi, anak saya terus sama siapa? Makanya saya sudah nggak mau berbuat gitu lagi, Pak. Cuma saya harus mampu bisa bertahan demi kelanjutan untuk anak saya.
Survivors like Husnul are thankful that they finally received compensation from the state in 2020, almost 20 years after the bombings. Over the years, they also tried to reconcile with the perpetrators of the Bali bombings. Ali Imran is another former GI member who played a key role in the bombings. He chose the sites for the attack and built the main bomb used in the van. Ali was spared the firing squad after he cooperated with the police. He spelled out the exact nature of the plot and put names to almost every role in the Bali cell. Ali also showed remorse in court. The 43-year-old is serving life imprisonment but is given permission by authorities to participate in public forums.
Saya memohon maaf kepada para korban, keluarga korban, dan pihak-pihak yang dirugikan karena aksi terorisme, khususnya bom Bali. Dimanapun mereka berada, agama apapun mereka. Saya bersyukur menjadi pelaku yang berani mengaku bersalah, menjadi pelaku yang berani memohon maaf sampai kapanpun.
The Bali bombings also caused economic losses when tourists stayed away from the resort island. However, it did not take too long for visitors to return.
Some things that happened here can happen everywhere. So I come from Germany, and you have also attacks in Germany, London 2005, Paris 2016. So you have to accept that things as that can happen.
The travel industry has long recovered from the impact of the Bali bombings. But for survivors, their scars remain, and even though they may forgive the perpetrators, they cannot forget the night that changed their lives forever. Next, CNA correspondent examines how Jemaah Islamiyah has evolved, shifting its focus away from violent extremism 20 years after the deadly attack. Former senior Jemaah Islamiyah member Joko Priyono, or better known as Karso, is enjoying his newfound freedom. The 49-year-old was released from prison in May this year. He served 4 years in jail for running training centers for the terrorist network in Central Java. Joko was part of the Neo-JI group formed shortly after JI was declared an illegal organization in 2008. He explains the group was established to correct a number of the old JI's ways, among them to create an Islamic state in Indonesia.
Neo-JI itu dari pemahaman jihadnya global, tidak bermain di sini. Keinginan untuk menegakkan Islam di Indonesia nggak ada. Islam itu nggak mungkin tegak di Indonesia. Kesimpulannya seperti itu. Islam itu akan tegak itu di Syam. Di Syam itu kan ada Palestina, Suriah yang sekarang, Yordan, kan gitu, Yaman. Kemudian Imam Mahdi pun munculnya di sana. Nabi Isa turunnya di sana juga. Turunan Dajjal di sana juga. Itu kisah-kisah hadisnya masyhur, sahih banyak.
Joko recruited trainees for the network and was in charge of operating 12 training centers. One of them was in Bawen district, less than an hour's drive from Semarang.
This house was used by the Neo-Jemaah Islamiyah as a training center between 2012 and 2018. The group used this place to teach its members about the art of self-defense. Each batch of trainees spent about 1 year here before being sent to Syria to join groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda.
Another training site was in Bandungan district amid the cool and scenic highlands. More than 70 young militants were trained in these sites. Joko says the idea of these training sites was mooted by top JI leader Para Wijayanto, who is currently in prison. The deadly Bali bombings in 2002 is the worst terrorist attack in Indonesia, but it's an act which JI may find hard to repeat. JI may not have the capability anymore as the resulting crackdown has crippled the group. It has forced JI into a period of decline and a shift from violent extremism.
Yang menjadi catatan kami adalah Jamaah Islamiyah ini sekarang sudah merubah strategi. Yang dulunya strategi kombatan, serangan-serangan, sekarang strateginya adalah melalui strategi yang lain, yaitu melalui strategi dakwah, atau sering melakukan strategi yang namanya tamkin. Tamkin itu menginfiltrasi masuk ke dalam segenap lini, ya.
At least one terrorism expert says JI poses a different threat now.
How JI run legitimate organizations, legitimate businesses, they follow the government rules publicly, but privately they channel their fund to send their hardcore, supporter to Syria. This is the future challenge that we are now. JI become mainstream. Even they embrace in day-to-day politics, they embrace in mainstream politics. And they're going to push their own agenda.
Indonesia also faces threats from JI's rivals. In 2016, the Jemaah Ansarud Daulah, or JAD, a group aligned to the Islamic State militant group, launched its first attack in Indonesia. Hendro Fernando is a former member of JAD linked to the attack in central Jakarta and was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison. Hendro, who now runs a quail farm, says the Islamic State's defeat in Syria in 2019 has diminished JAD's threat in Indonesia, and there's discord in the group.
Mereka saling mengkafirkan pemahamannya sampai saat ini terpecah gitu. Nah, inilah kesempatan atau celah ya untuk kita bisa mengcounter ya. Artinya justru itu membuat lebih mudah kita untuk masuk ya, untuk menjadarkan teman-teman bahwa ya di kalian sendiri saja terpecah, bagaimana kalian ingin membangun sebuah umat yang besar ini.
Hendro, who is a product of the state's de-radicalization program, admits that it's never easy to leave terrorist organizations. He says the lure of going back to the old ways is strong.
Saya sendiri ketika bebas tahun 2020 ya, itu sudah 2 kali ditawarkan jaringan untuk kembali lagi. Dan ditawarkan untuk taubat dari NKRI. Dan juga ditawarkan untuk usaha. Akhirnya saya tetap memilih dengan apa yang saya yakini saat ini. Tawaran-tawaran tersebut memang ada, Pak, dari jaringan. Makanya kita ini tarik-menarik sama oleh mereka gitu.
Spiritual leader of JI, Abu Bakar Bashir, who is closely linked to the Bali bombings, appears to be staying away from the influence of radical groups. The cleric recently raised eyebrows by accepting Pancasila as Indonesia's state ideology after rejecting it for many years. For the first time, the 84-year-old also attended this year's Independence Day observance ceremony.
Awalnya saya kaget. Ya semoga yang dilakukan oleh Ustadz Abu Bakar Bashir adalah murni dari hati dan ini bisa mengedukasi masyarakat bahwa Pancasila tidak bertentangan dengan agama. Bahkan Pancasila merupakan solusi alternatif untuk kita bersatu.
Former senior JI member Joko has also embraced Pancasila during his time in prison. Joko now runs a small optical business and works with other radicalized individuals to correct their vision on extremism. Next, CNA correspondent finds out more about conservatism in Indonesia and that the seeds of terrorism were sown long before the Bali bombings. This is where a bloody combat took place between an Islamist group and security forces more than 30 years ago. Zainal Arifin was just 9 years old when he was caught in the conflict in Talangsari village, Lampung province. More than 130 people died, the majority of them were villagers.
Waktu saya keluar dari bangunan yang dibakar itu saya melihat korban itu udah banyak, Pak, yang masih sekarat. Bahkan saya sampai merangkak setengah tiap untuk menghindari peluru-peluru nyasar itu. Sampai melangkahin mayat pun saya langkahin waktu itu. Saya lari menuju ke sungai. Nah, sungainya kan yang belakang saya ini persis.
The Talangsari incident in 1989 was sparked when a group of residents formed an exclusive community which developed tensions with other villages and authorities.
Many residents who were caught in the conflict ran away from their homes to hide in this river. There were children and men who were injured in the fight. Survivors told me that the river was full of people bleeding, that the water turned red.
The group had links with Jemaah Islamiyah, the regional terrorist organization responsible for the 2002 Bali bombings. It had rejected the state ideology of Pancasila and established its own Islamic community. Lampung is the gateway between Java and Sumatra Islands and is notorious as a hotbed for terrorists. Last year, local authorities arrested 48 Jemaah Islamiyah members and subsequently 171 others surrendered themselves.
Lampung is the birthplace of another conservative group called Khilafatul Muslimin. Indonesian authorities say the group aspires to turn the country into an Islamic state. In June, police arrested many of its members, including the leader of the group in Lampung.
Members of Khilafatul Muslimin in Lampung live in several exclusive communities called Kampung Khilafah or Caliphate Village, a sign of growing conservatism in the country. Authorities have managed to persuade more than 500 of its members to pledge their allegiance to the state.
Khilafatul Muslimin ini memang dia tidak menunjukkan sikap radikal, tetapi ternyata mereka membuat struktur menyerupai suatu state. Ada kepala, ada boleh dibilang gubernurnya, ada dengan bahasa lain. Nah, ini kami identifikasikan berarti ingin membuat struktur negara di luar negara kesatuan Republik.
Khilafatul Muslimin has cooperated with authorities and denies any intentions to replace a democratically elected government.
Khilafatul Muslimin tidak pernah terbukti merugikan negara, bahkan mendukung negara. Tidak pernah demo, tidak pernah mengkritisi kebijakan negara atau presiden, dan tidak pernah berbuat anarkis itu di mana saja.
The 2002 Bali bombings forced the Indonesian government to scrutinize conservative groups and take urgent counter-terrorism measures. The anti-terrorism bill was signed into law by then President Megawati Soekarno-Putri 6 days after the incident. In 2018, the law was improved, allowing authorities to make preemptive arrests and detain terror suspects longer. But this may not be enough.
Jaringan terorisme, estimasi yang masuk dalam jaringan terorisme, ya, estimasinya JI, JAD dan lain sebagainya, ya sekarang sekitar antara 14 sampai 15 ribuan. Oke, yang selalu kami monitor. Kami akan selalu melakukan kontra-kontra, kami akan selalu melakukan upaya-upaya untuk menurunkan mereka.
The National Counter-Terrorism Agency, or BNPT, says stricter regulations are needed to curb radical views that can lead to acts of terror and violence.
Kami hanya bisa mencegah sebelum melakukan aksi teror, tapi tidak bisa melakukan pencegahan untuk proses hukum terhadap paham radikalisme yang menjiwainya. Tapi mereka yang mempropagandakan khilafah dalam upaya-upaya untuk negara agama menurut versi mereka, kita belum bisa bertindak. Sehingga mutlak dibutuhkan regulasi yang melarang semua ideologi yang bertentangan dengan ideologi negara Pancasila.
At least one observer agrees that the root causes of terrorism need to be addressed.
Ini seperti kita memetik buah dalam satu pohon. Buahnya kita petik, namun akarnya, pohonnya tidak dicabut. Maka otomatis yang terjadi adalah setiap musim pohon itu akan terus berbuah. Terorisme tidak akan berhenti bila negara ini tidak tegas.
However, introducing such draconian laws requires strong political will.
We cannot afford to constantly arrest those people. But in the same time, the question will be, how do we strike the balance between preventions and respecting human rights? And this is always the constant dynamic in a country like Indonesia, you know.
2 decades after the Bali attacks, the battle for influence over ideology has shifted to cyberspace. Arif is a former Jemaah Islamiyah sympathizer who was taken in by the group's radical ideology after the attack in 2002. The 40-year-old is IT savvy and played an active role in radical internet forums.
Bukti loyalitas itu yang paling bawah, tingkatan yang paling rendah adalah menyebarkan paham di media sosial. Itu paling rendah. Jadi kalau mereka tidak sebarkan, mereka berdosa. Jadi dan itu relatif tidak ada pidana, tidak bisa dipidana sementara ini. Kecuali dia sudah posting minta dana buat beli senjata misalnya, itu sudah bisa kena.
Arif was convicted when he crossed the line after being involved in the sale of weapons. After serving time in prison, Arif now is an active contributor to Ruang Obrol, an online initiative aimed at rehabilitating radical Islamists. He believes the digital realm is key in defeating extremist propaganda, but more time may be needed before tougher laws can be accepted in the fight against terrorism in Indonesia.